Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. After many requests from people, they're like, "Man, you got to have Oisin back. He's got that cool accent." And talk about Irish history. I get a lot of comments. People are like, "I didn't know that about Irish history." And I think even people in Ireland, and I'm speaking for myself, when I grew up, we got inundated with Irish history growing up in school, but it's thousands of years, and it's so long, and it's all conflict, and it's kids are kids, right? I always liked history, but I didn't pay as much attention to it as I should. So, kind of going down these roads and talking about stuff is pretty cool. So, welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Oisin from his office in Dublin, Ireland.
All right. How are you getting on?
I'm good. Do we need subtitles for you? With your Irish accent? Actually, my Irish accent comes back when I'm talking to Irish people a little bit. Um, so, anybody, we've done a couple of podcasts about Irish history stuff. We went way back in the 20s, we did a lot of that. And then we did some more recent stuff. And so I asked Oisin to come back on. And today we're going to talk about what, Oisin?
We're going to talk about jailbreaks in Irish history.
Jailbreaks in Irish history. Super cool. Super cool subject, like jailbreaks, because throughout the world, like real jailbreaks, not this garbage you see in Hollywood with Sylvester Stallone, friggin', that's crap, right? But actual jailbreaks, pretty cool history. There's been a bunch, and there's been a couple in Northern Ireland, and there's been when we talk about paramilitary prisons, right? So is that where we're going to keep it, on paramilitary type IRA? Stuff.
IRA
So
of things,
yeah. So generally, these paramilitary prisons in the 1970s, early, just for background, the British in Northern Ireland introduced internment, where they could just arrest anybody they want and throw them in jail, right? No charges, nothing, and it was political suicide. Like, it was a very controversial subject. So they built Long Kesh, which was barbed wire fences and a little bit improvised, kind of imagine World War II freaking. The Great Escape type thing, right? And there was escapes from there. Brendan Hughes escaped from there in a mattress rolled up, right? But then they built the Maze prison, or H Block, which was reportedly the most secure prison in Europe at the time, right? And then there was a pretty mass escape from it. But go ahead, man. You take the ball there and run with it.
Well, like, as you said yourself, it's always a bad idea to name something unbreakable or impregnable or unsinkable.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
you're just tempted.
Be like, challenge accepted.
Yeah, exactly. So as you said yourself, I mean, initially you had the Long Kesh, which was like basically a military sort of it was a POW camp in a World War II kind of style. But the Maze was inside of that. So you had a prison, max security prison, which the only equivalent towards maybe the listeners might know if they're in America is ADX Florence, that kind of picture, like a maximum security prison, state of the art. Around that, there's a prison camp. And then around that, there's a military barracks. So there's 3 layers.
This is Long Kesh, or this is the Maze?
They're one and the same essentially, but the Maze itself, the Maze itself.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the Long Kesh is the prelim, but the Maze was built.
Yes.
It was a work in progress, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, they had motion sensors on the ground to prevent people tunneling out. They had cameras everywhere. Basically, they tried to atomize each prisoner in the sense that they would hood them, earmuffs, blindfolds, get them to a blacked out van if they had to move them anywhere else. So no one had really an idea where they were in the prison.
Yeah. What year are we talking about, Oisin? Sorry.
This would be 1983, but this prison was in effect from 1971, 1972. And all these security measures had to be taken in the context of what happened before. So you had the dirty protests and then the hunger strikes in 1981. You had 10 Republican prisoners starving themselves to death. Things were very highly tense. A lot of sort of brutalization of prisoners, and also a lot of prisoners getting killed by the IRA outside of the prison. So they'd be targeting them,
Prisoners or prison guards?
Prison guards would be targeted.
Prison guards, yeah. I'm old enough to remember the 80s. And I remember going to school when the hunger strikes were going on. And it was like Dundalk is not too far south of the border. And you had IRA marching in protest. You had them. I remember going to school one time. This is like a very kind of vague memory for me, but they were all lined on the side of the road with these black flags and balaclavas, and it was a very, very tense moment. So if you look in context, the troubles resurfaced in Northern Ireland about 69, right? Started as a civil rights movement, and then it evolved. The 70s were very, very violent. Thus, the introduction of internment. And then we were going through, and now we're 10, 12 years in, and we're into the early 80s. Long Cash gets built out into this maximum security prison where they throw IRA, INLA, UVF, UFF, like the true Protestant and Catholic paramilitaries in there. Not together, I don't think.
Oh, no.
But they put them all in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't work out well.
No. But oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm just kind of putting in context. The IRA always viewed themselves as prisoners of war, political prisoners, because their goal was to get the British out. The British always looked at them as criminals, right? So they wanted special category status, the IRA. They didn't want to wear their own uniforms, didn't want to wear prison uniforms, didn't want to be forced to work. And I always wondered why the British were so adamant about not allowing them to call it a war. Right, it's crime. Thatcher famously said, "Crime is crime is crime," and because if you called it a war, you'd be able to hammer them much, much harder, right? But I saw an interview not too long ago from like the late 70s, early 80s, and it was one of the I think it was the Secretary of Northern Ireland, and he said, "We'll never call it a war because we see Northern Ireland as British soil. And when you have a war on your own soil, that's a civil war. And we will never admit to a civil war on our own turf, right?" And that makes total sense, right? That's why they would never call it that. So as we go through the 70s and the 80s, the Maze Prison or H Block, state of the art, everything's thrown in there with some of the most violent people in Europe housed there. Right, a very tough job for prison guards too, right? Because if you're in a regular prison and you're in any doubt that the prisoners will kill you, the prisoners you're watching, some of them in life sentences, their day job was to kill authority figures from the British government, right? That was what they did. So I imagine they had to tread lightly a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, look, what you said there is 100% correct. I mean, like. The idea of criminalization was a big part of it. They took a note out of the Book of the Americans with Vietnamization. And they were like, the first step was Ulsterization, then criminalization. So Ulsterization, there was an awful lot of negative press of British soldiers coming back in boxes to mainland England. So first off, it's like, we got to make sure that it's the UDR rather than some British regiment that's getting killed.
Just tell us who the UDR is.
The Ulster Defence Regiment. So these are the largest regiment in the British Army, all selected locally from the north, from Ulster, I'd say almost exclusively from a loyalist background, and there was many ties between them and loyalist paramilitary groups like the UVF, UDA, Red Hand Commandos. So a problem in itself, but a problem that would probably benefit the British quite a bit,
At least in the early days. Yeah, the whole subject of collusion between the British authorities in Northern Ireland and the paramilitary groups, the loyalists, is a whole another fascinating subject. But sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. Yeah, I mean, like, so, and like the fight. I think you're right. Like, I mean, the 5 demands that they had were pretty basic demands. They weren't even asking to be let out early or anything like that. They were just asking for basically treated essentially like a POW. They could have probably reduced the amount of motivation some of these people had to cause problems if they had just conceded to that and just not announced it, essentially. But everyone's hindsight's 2020.
I think that's kind of what they did. Like during the hunger strikes, they conceded a lot of stuff, but it never put out publicly. It was kind of on the hush hush, so they wouldn't lose face, right?
Yeah. At the end of the hunger strikes, they basically gave the 5 demands, but they never announced POW status.
Right.
But it's after that, like 10 people had starved themselves to death, and a lot of young fellas were very radicalized by it. People who had never have even thought of joining the IRA were now thinking about this, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
negative outcomes. And when you think about Irish um, paramilitaries and going to prison, there's like usually three options. Option number one would be like hunger strike, possible death. But when that happens, they become a martyr. Second is a wait out your turn. And when you eventually get out, plot revenge, which, like, if you look at Tom Clark way back in 1916, I mean, like, that had massive consequences. And then the final one would be, you know, the final one would be summary execution, which also martyr, like, which happened to the leaders in 1916. Not a good outcome. And then obviously,
Yep.
if we exclude those three, the only thing that's really left is escape. You know?
Yep. Or wait for a peace treaty and get let out.
Yeah, exactly.
But nobody waits for that, right? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about escape.
Yeah.
Particularly the one in the maze that took a lot of people out the gate and created havoc. Let's talk through that one.
Yeah. So this impregnable prison, in the early hours of in 1983, 38 prisoners escaped within 20 minutes. So if you think about the H block, it's called that because it's shaped like a H. And in the center of the H, colloquially known as the circle, was the nerve center of the H block, which controlled essentially four prisons, or four wings. Now, if you got control of the center, you got control of the block. They had very, I suppose, intelligently tried to suss out what was the weakest part of the prison. And they've realized very quickly it was the prison guards. Prison guards were almost completely selected from the loyalist community. And as a result, they were, they were susceptible to certain things. For example, they brutalized a lot of these prisoners during the hunger strikes, and very kind of in a strange way they played that against them. They wanted to make them believe they had broken them, and they wanted to come across as being now compliant. So they had people like notable figures like Bick McFarlane, who was the OC in charge of, or so the officer commanding officer of the hunger strikers, coming out and making them tea and like polishing their shoes for them, and they loved this.
And they're doing it to gain access and placement to restricted areas, right?
Exactly, yeah. And to make and in the mind of the prisoner guards to get intelligence and information through friendly conversation. They'd be making a guy a cup of tea and bringing him a slice of toast, and he'd be saying, "Jesus, it's really hard to get out of the gate at this hour. Oh, look, they do stops on this place, but they don't check the load in that place so I can get a bit quicker." And they started realizing other things like, the prison guards started using, like, for example, the food lorry to do sort of furniture removal for their own houses on the weekends.
Yeah.
And they realized, well, that's a really good point of entry then. It won't be noticed if it's going around the town. So once they started realizing they had, to a certain degree, gotten enough useful information, and the guard was down for a lot of these prison guards, they had to figure out the really difficult aspect of where the hell they were in relation to the jail. The block they were in was H7. And in order to do this, they were able to meticulously map out their own little surroundings, but they needed to get aerial photographs and ordnance survey maps in. So they got those smuggled in. Now, that's incredibly difficult to do, mind you, because anything around that area was surveilled massively. So I don't know how they managed to smuggle them in, but they did. They realized that it was very possible. And they also realized that if they were able to get the center, they'd be able to capture basically the entire block.
Yeah, you're talking about a reconnaissance operation that took months. It's not like they're sitting back for a couple of days. And when you're like, I've never been a prisoner other than in a training, but when you're a prisoner, like when you're a guard, right? You're there for 8-hour shift. You go home in the evening. You have a family. You have other priorities, right? Kind of checking a box. It's human nature. It's not like the guards were complacent. It's human nature. And you have a big state-of-the-art facility. The weakness is the people, right? The guards, the humans, right? Because we're all flawed people, right? But as a prisoner, That's it. You are there with nothing to do but watch and watch everything. And you're working towards your freedom, your life. They're working towards a paycheck. And that's across the board. It's funny because when I think about the prisoner sitting back and watching everything that happens, I think about reconnaissance, right? I've done a lot of reconnaissance in my life. A lot of sniper reconnaissance, which sometimes is a ghillie suit and sitting on a hilltop, and sometimes it's in a vehicle, in plain clothes, and then there's a multiple way to do it, right? But when you're doing reconnaissance, if you take it in a very simple form, like let's say I am in an overwatch position looking at an enemy camp, right? I'm looking at the enemy composition, disposition, and strength, right? Composition, how they're made up. Disposition, how they're deployed. Their strength, right? I'm looking at their weapons and all that, but it goes much, much deeper. I'm looking at, because we're the reconnaissance elements are looking for a weakness, right? So you're looking at patterns of life, obviously, who comes on, shift, if you have patterns in the shift work and who comes on when. Usually with a reconnaissance team, you try to put the same guy on glass at the same time every day so he can build that pattern of life, right? But if this one guy comes out and he's got a really squared away uniform, he carries his weapon properly, he's very diligent, that tells you a lot about his work ethic and his professionalism and the way he does that. Another guy comes out and he's smoking and joking, hands in the pockets, on his phone, you know what I mean? That is another key indicator. That leads into the professionalism of that force at that time, right? So as you sit back and do all this reconnaissance work and you're looking for, cameras and dogs and all that very basic, obvious stuff, you're also looking very deeply into the professionalism, the composition, disposition, and strength of the enemy, and you're looking for a chink in the armor. It's there. Sometimes it takes time to find it, but you're looking at for the most opportune time to strike. You're looking for that weakness, and that's how I think of those prisoners. They're sitting back every day, and they're watching every single thing they do to the way their shoes are shined, right? This guy's shoes are all scuffed. He's a bit raggedy, like he doesn't pay attention like this other guy. This guy's probably more... He's going to catch things. That's it. You know what I mean? So that level of reconnaissance that take months, and I imagine they meet and they cross notes and all that kind of thing, and they build up that pattern. I find that piece super interesting. Because I've done it. I've done a lot of that, for a different purpose. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd make this point though. The difficulty they may have in their situation is the fact that they had to make it a need to know basis. So everything was on a cellular structure, and they also had to get it okayed by the IRA on the outside of the prison, because they needed I suppose the behind all good escapes, you need an inside team and an outside team, someone to be able to.
Is that your phone keeps going off?
That is, yeah. Sorry, I'm just going to mute that.
Nobody dying or anything, is
No one's dying. No one's dying. They will be if they keep annoying me. I'm just going to mute that person.
But in a military sense, you don't just go in. Let's say there's 500 prisoners. These guys are going to try this, and there's a committee that approves all escapes, right? It's not just, hey, us three are going to try to jump the fence, and these guys are going to dig a tunnel, and it's a committee, and it has to be approved, and there's an escape committee, and that's the same for the same structure the IRA had. There was a escape committee, need to know basis, cellular structure, and inside team, outside team,
yeah,
like you said.
And each wing of the prison camp would have an intelligence officer, an escape officer. They smuggled out basically all the plans in tiny little pieces of paper, secreted out whatever way they could to people outside. And the plan was essentially, once they broke out through using the food van, they would take them to South Armagh, which was basically a safe place, essentially, and they'd be able to exfil across the border.
Right. Yeah, very porous border. I know it's a porous border because I've patrolled it for years.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting part of it, though, is that to make this plan work, they needed firearms, and they had to smuggle those in. Now, how they got smuggled in, I have no clue. That we'll never know, probably. But
you probably had to wash them when you were reassembling. You probably had to wash them.
Yeah. So
I don't know. Again, lapse security, right? And it's hard to catch everything. American prisons now, state of the art supermax prisons. they find all kinds of crap in there, drugs and all kinds of stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the prison wallet, man.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, so keep it warm, I suppose. I mean, like anyway. So, they got several firearms into these people, and at that point, it was sort of understood that, again, as you said, the flow of life of these people. They realized, again, loyalist community, Presbyterian predominantly. Sunday was a day of rest. Less prison officers on duty. Minimal staff, skeleton staff. Chose their time to strike, So basically, they reckoned they need to seize the center within 7 minutes, because if they wanted to get that center, they had to make it to another control center called a tally lodge, which controlled the main gate to the prison before the next deployment of prison officers were to be deployed into the prison. So essentially, one of the intelligence officers there, a guy called Bobby Story, who's now since passed away, had a code word, bumper, which is for a floor cleaner, shouted out bumper, plan went to action. Basically, everyone who had firearms knew they were to use them in a certain way with sort of speed and aggression, basically to make sure people understood it was an IRA operation.
Yeah, to cease compliance. Yeah.
Exactly. But the plan ideally was not to fire the weapons because it would cause an alarm essentially, but just basically to have enough aggression to make people submit, So basically Jerry Kelly, who later on became a member of the Stormont government under the and also the spokesperson on policing and justice for Sinn Féin, which is kind of funny. So like basically his point was to seize the center. He pulled out his gun, pointed at the prison guard and said, like, if you move anywhere near the panic button, I will shoot you. He was momentarily...
Like I said earlier, those guards are under no illusion that these guys won't kill him, right?
Yeah. Well, this guard unfortunately went for it, and Jerry Kelly shot twice, shot him once in the head. Didn't kill him, but put pressure on the wound and said, just stay where you are. They seized the entire block. So basically, he signaled to everyone else. And at that point, it was almost like a simultaneous kind of action. All the prison guards were seized. They were brought into one main room. They were stripped of their prison clothes. Prisoners put on the prison clothes, put on the prison warden clothes. Zip tied all of them, and then basically realized that they had, because of the shooting, had lapsed past that 7 minute kind of window that they wanted. So they're delayed by about maybe 3 minutes. Either way, they got into the van, and they had realized that the driver of the van was the most important person because, as you said yourself, people get very lax. They stop checking IDs and all the rest, but they remember familiar faces. So they had to keep this guy in. They couldn't just tie him up with the others. So they basically made it very clear to him. They said, look, they lied essentially. They said, look, we have a hand grenade taped to the bottom of your seat. We'll set it off. And Jerry Kelly himself was wedged under the seat with the driver and had a pistol pointed at him and said, look, just want to make you know, if you make any sudden moves or any variation from the plan, I will shoot you. So 38 of these IRA prisoners were in the back of the van for this whole...
And the driver was just a civilian, right? He was driving the food truck.
He was civilian, right? Yeah, he's a civilian. Most of these guys...
You can't blame that guy, man.
No.
You know what? Hey, I'll do whatever you say, man, and exactly. I hope you get caught later, but not my problem.
Exactly, and the prison guard was interviewed. Like most of the prison wardens and all the rest were usually former British soldiers or former police. That's by and large the majority of them. But what I would say about the guy who was the driver, like, I mean, in fairness to him, he was very honest. He said, look, he said, they showed me ordnance maps of the prison that they had smuggled in, and I pointed out the mistakes in them. I said, no, actually, it's 40 yards sooner when I take the left turn because I don't want you to get spooked and shoot me.
Yeah.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah. You got a family to go home to, man. I drive a food truck.
Exactly, yeah. Jerry
Yeah.
Kelly was Jerry Kelly did an interview about this as well, and he was talking about the conversation he had with the actual driver, and they're trying to make small talk, kind of relax each other and all the rest. And he said like, "Oh, how many kids you have? Oh, that's great. How much do they pay for this?" He's like, "Not fucking enough." And he's like, "Yep, you're right."
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So
Um,
yeah, so they eventually the plan is fairly straightforward at this point: get to the Tully Lodge, get the main gate open, and get that vehicle out of there. Problem is they're 3 minutes late. They get into the Tally Lodge, they get control of the Tally Lodge, seize it, uh, put the put the prison guards in one room, zip tie them, the usual. Um, and the unfortunate part of it is more and more. It's like almost like a comedy sketch. More and more prison guards are coming in to check in for their shift. So each time they come in, they have to take more and more hostages. So what was supposed to be six
yeah,
hostages is now about 24 hostages.
yeah.
So they're
And
running this.
the guards are not armed, I assume.
No,
Right? It wouldn't be that easy to
no,
take
no,
them.
no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
They're not
But
armed.
there is a British Army cordon on this place, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
The
Yeah.
cordon around it, the army barracks around it is heavily armed. So essentially, they're running. They've run out of zip ties at this point, and they get a phone call, and of course, he gets the guy in charge at Tully Lodge to answer it, and says someone's hit an emergency button. And your man said, he again looking back on it, hindsight's 2020, but like the guy is clearly signaling on the phone that I'm being held hostage. He's like,
Yeah.
Where's the emergency button?" It's like, "It's under the TV. Where do you expect it to be?" Like, and he's like, "Oh, how do
Yeah.
I turn it off?" And everyone's looking at him like, "We know how to turn that off, for Christ's sake." And the guy says, "Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, just pull the button out, you stupid bollocks," and puts the phone down. So I mean, they're very
Yeah.
lucky at that
Yeah.
point. The
Now,
problem,
normally you would have a duress code word, right?
yeah, yeah,
That you would use, but 1980s.
1980s, and I think a victim of the fact that they never thought they'd have the situation because it was unbreakable.
Yep.
So again, people are starting to realize, geez, there's an awful lot of prison officers in this small tally lodge at this point, and then they realize, shit, it's a breakout. They hit the alarm, they block the gate. The IRA prisoners who are in the back of the lorry at this point realize, look, we just got to make a break for it. So the plan A, which was to take this lorry and drive it all the way down to South Armagh, is gone. They are bolting. So they basically go through the gate, which has been opened, but has been jammed shut with a patrol car, and they just get out of the gate. They escape
On foot.
on foot. Now, several things had been sequestered to them before their escape. Some people had gotten like civilian clothes. Some people had items to hotwire cars, and obviously firearms. So, these people, the personalities kind of come out a bit more when things don't go to plan, right? So very quickly, Bick McFarlane, who was more or less in charge of the actual escape itself, designated three main teams, and to basically escape back and meet at the rendezvous point in South Armagh. Now the problem is essentially is that again, things are not going to plan at this point. Bick McFarlane and Jerry Kelly hotwire two cars. Bick McFarlane takes a group of people with him. Jerry Kelly takes a group of people with him, and they go on their way. Now, again, some of the people who are involved in this breakout, kind of important to know who they are because they kind of affect the strategies and how to escape. One of the people in Bick McFarlane's car was a guy called Seamus McElwain. Now, this guy actually went to school with my dad. So
Really?
he was in the same school, Christian
Wow.
Brothers, My dad played football with him. Like, as we always say at the start of these talks, we're not condoning anything about the IRA or like political violence or whatever. But like, for all, like when I ever chat to my dad about it, he's always like, he was just a very quiet, nice fella,
Yep.
normal guy,
That's what they say. That's what they say about serial killers
Yeah.
who live next door.
But-
you grew up quite close to the border, right, in Monaghan?
Yeah, Manon. Yeah. I mean, like,
Ireland's not that big a country.
No.
Like I run into guys now, and I go, "Oh, you're a retired special forces guy, right?" And what group you in? Oh, I was in first group. And I go, do you know this guy? And he'd be like, yeah, I was on the same team. Like it's, and that's an organization, right? You will run into people all the time who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. It's funny. My daughter was here last couple of days, and she said, some guy hit her up on Instagram or Facebook and said, are you Kevin Owens' daughter? And she was like, yeah, who's this? And he was like, I'm your cousin, your dad's sister's son.
Oh, Jesus. That's gas.
Yeah.
Was it
Funny,
from
yeah.
was it from the dock?
Yeah, it was. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
No, but like, the gas thing about it is like, you hear, like, say for example, my dad's account of him, and then you read, do you ever read Big Boy Rules about the SES in the North, or Bandit Country? Mm-mm. Those two books?
I read Bandit Country. I read Bandit Country twice, actually. Yeah.
One or two of those books describe Seamus McElwain very well. And it was an SES officer who's like, he's the kind of guy we'd like to have in the regiment. Like, he's a very dangerous, very, very capable, very dangerous fella. And his big thing was fieldcraft. He was very good at operating within that kind of rural area. He understood if you were walking around in the daytime, a farmer would spot you from 3-4 fields away and know you're a stranger. Mm-hmm. And he knew,
especially in certain areas like South Armagh.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, again, he's like, we're going to first get this car off the road now because it's a stolen car. We're going to hold up in a house. We're going to take a hostage and we're going to wait it out for a little bit. And then we're going to go on foot. Because bear in mind, like, James McElwain, on some accounts, if you look at Bandit Country, like, he'd be walking about, he'd walk the length of Antrim in a night in patrols and all this kind of stuff. He was just kind of a very intense kind of figure.
You're talking at this time, like the British in Northern Ireland, there was probably no security force in Europe or maybe in the world that could respond and lock down an area like the British Army. Like, because every time something happened, they flexed, the police, cordon, a whole company of it. Like, even sometimes something as small as a small crime, a car gets stolen, right, in Belfast. That's either car got stolen and the cops seen it, or it's an ambush.
Yep.
It's a baited ambush, right? So the cops go in to investigate that. They go in with a platoon of military who cordon the whole area off and have helicopters up. Very, very, very fast at responding. So as soon as the alarm was raised on this breakout, I can't imagine the hundreds and hundreds of troops and helicopters and vehicles and roads blocked off and cordon. Like, to get through that, like getting out the gate's one part, but getting through the cordon is a whole nother problem set.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, like, it was interesting. So like, they held up in a house, which was a Protestant person's house. They parked the car inside their garage, and they said, look, we don't want to do you any harm, but we need to lay low. And basically they waited it out for about 24 hours. And they said to them, look, we need to take some supplies, food, all the rest. But, we need to make sure you're not going to the police. So we've kind of come to a decision here. Like, we would probably take your eldest son with us and release him later down the line to make sure that you don't go to the police. And they were like, well, we can't do that. And Bick McFarlane realized they were quite a religious family. So he said, look, you have a family Bible. He gets the family Bible out and says, if you swear in the family Bible not to go to the police for 72 hours, we'll take you at your word. They did that and complied, which is bizarre to me because I'd have gone straight to the cop.
Crazy, right?
I'd have gone straight to the cops.
I would too. I'd be like, I'll do it. Yep.
Yeah,
boom. Yeah. You wouldn't be at the door. I'd be on the phone.
Yeah.
But wow, that was a risky course of action.
Yeah.
On their part.
It was.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, then they made, like, they followed basically McElwain's approach, which was travel at night, through hedge groves, everything else, sleep during the day, and make your way down to South Armagh. The other lads who broke off, Jerry Kelly, he went into Craigavon. So they're all trying to make their way down towards Armagh. So they're in North Armagh at this point. He makes a phone call to a member of the IRA in Lurgan and says, look, we need to be taken out of this district now and need to be hidden. And the guy brings him to this old arms dump, which had, like, Lurgan, if you know the pleasant countryside of Lurgan, I mean, that place has been raided so often, for even in the more recent years, it gets raided, And this
Yeah.
thing, this arms dump hadn't been found in all that time. So they said that's probably a good place to hide. Now it was under the floorboards of a house, and they stayed there for 2 weeks under the floorboard.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So basically, they would, your Kenko coffee jar was your bathroom, and they just stayed there.
Hey, it's better than being in the maze.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
At least you're free, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So these guys then eventually managed to sequester themselves across the border. Eventually, after the 2 weeks, it was very interesting. Like when they were actually under those floorboards for the 2 weeks, they took one of the other members of the IRA from the outside IRA took the stolen car and drove it over to the East Tyrone border to make people think they had already gotten across.
Right. Yeah. Just contextually for people who don't know that area, I think the maze was southwest of Belfast. Is that true?
Lisburn
Somewhere up
area.
there?
Yeah, Lisburn area.
What's the distance in miles, kind of very broadly, to the border?
Ooh. If you're driving, it would be at least an hour driving to get from Lisburn to Crossmaglen.
Okay. All right. Just for people that they're not traveling hundreds of miles. Right?
No.
Hundreds of miles, but
No.
they had crappy roads back in the 80s. They're better now. But, I remember driving across the country, and now it'd probably take an hour. And back then it took 4 hours because the roads were crappy. Okay. I think lying low, it takes discipline for 2 weeks, especially on the floorboards. But that lets that. Because hey, they've been out for an hour. The cordon's going to go here. How far could they possibly travel? Okay, they've been out for 6 hours. The cordon's here. Now they've gone for 2 weeks. They could be anywhere. Yeah. There is no cordon anymore. Essentially, the cordon is Northern Ireland, right?
Exactly.
And you're spreading the forces very, very thin at that point. And they've probably given up the search, hoping to catch you in other ways at that point. It's kind of smart because if you try to run as fast as you can for the border, you're probably going to get nabbed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, in total, 19 of these people escaped and remained escaped, right? 15 were captured within like 48 hours. Now, interestingly enough, there's a lot of controversy about it, but out of the 19 that escaped, I'd say about 18 were IRA and one was a guy who was arrested for being a member of the IRA but was not a member of the IRA.
Really? Yeah. He probably was after that.
He was, exactly. That's what I was thinking myself. Like, it was a gentleman called Kevin Barryart who, coincidentally, when he did escape, went over to San Francisco. The IRA got him false identity, all the rest, and was living a free life for like 10 years until the FBI caught him.
Right.
But like this guy, people would say that he's most likely a person who was just arrested and became a member of the IRA in prison because he was,
right.
Yeah. But
you got right. I heard a story years ago. I don't know how true it is, but when I lived in New York, somebody was telling me that there was a guy working as a bartender in New York, in an Irish neighborhood, and he had escaped from the maze. He was there for a long time, and one day, bartender in the bar, and like 4 guys come in, construction outfits, helmets, covered in freaking dust and all that. They come in, sit down, have a couple of beers. They're chatting away with this guy, and then at a certain point, he reaches to grab the money or something, and they nab him. The FBI, and that's what I heard. And they lowered his. They probably figured he was really dangerous, and they lowered his threat level, right? And they sat there for a little bit, had a couple of beers, and then they pounced on him. I don't know if it's true or not, but
you never know.
I heard it. And it may have been that guy in San Francisco. I don't know, but
it's an interesting one because there was a really high profile case in New York a while back. They weren't maze prison escapees, but they escaped from the Crumlin jail. And they were members of the M60 gang, which were the nickname they got. They were an active service unit. They killed like the highest ranking member of the SES in the north at the time, a guy called Herbert Westmacott. And it caused a lot of frustration because usually at the time when an SES soldier got killed, they would be returned to their parent unit, like they were para or they were Grenadier Guard or whatever. But he was...
Yeah, they wouldn't admit it.
Yeah, exactly. But this guy was a very well-known British family. They couldn't deny it. And it just looks bad, These guys escaped from Crumlin jail, went over to America. He lived in... Angelo Fusco was his name. Italian name. IRA member. But lived in New York for I'd say about 10 years or something like that. When they arrested him, there was a huge amount of like politicians preventing him from being extradited. One of them was one of the Bushes, which is gas. Like
Yeah,
not
yeah.
George Bush, but I think it was like not Jeb Bush. I'm not sure. One of them anyway.
It wasn't Teddy Kennedy, was it? Kennedy used to be
Kennedy
into
did
all
that
that
as well.
stuff too. He used to be a big advocate of Kennedy, right? Irish American.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was involved. I think one of the Guilford Four end up when he got out. He married one of the Kennedy's
That's right.
daughters, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, and all that kind of thing. So they were very, very connected in that whole thing.
That was Paddy
And it's
Hill. Yeah.
that romanticized. It's that romanticized fight that the Americans had in the Revolution against the British and all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. The so did any stay? How many stayed out and never got recaptured?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So when you get out of a prison break like that, like you have two options. You have three. Well, you have two options, two main options. You can get a false identity, false papers, and you can live your own sort of anonymous life and not be involved in the struggle, right? Or you can return to active service. Now,
Yep.
they were given that option, and like I have the list in front of me here of who did. Like, a surprising number of these fellas went back to active service units immediately after this. There was three big ones: Seamus McIlwain, Patrick McKierney, and Kieran Fleming. Now, there's kind of like a Monaghan element to this as well. So Seamus McIlwain's from Monaghan. Patrick McKierney, Patrick McKierney is from Tyrone, but he was heavily associated with a very prominent member of the Monaghan IRA called Jim Lina. And then Kieran Fleming was in Fermanagh, but again, in the same neck of the woods as Seamus McIlwain. So a lot of their operations were probably being launched from Monaghan into the surrounding areas. And at this point, like in the 70s, the SES were predominantly in South Armagh, despite not being announced as such. They only announced it, like I think it was in 1974, but they'd been there for like 5 years. And at that point in the 80s, they kind of thought, well, South Armagh is lost. East Tyrone, however, is about to be lost because there was increasing military action there by the IRA members. Like they were shooting down helicopters left, right, and center. This is like becoming a real problem.
Yeah. I remember that. And when you say lost, it was lost to the British forces. Like South Armagh became, they call it bandit country. It was like a no-go area for the British Army because if they drove in, they hit IEDs. And if they flew in, they got shot at with machine guns. And like it was a very active area. I don't know if I should tell this, but I have stories, right? So I remember when I was in the Irish Army in the infantry along the border, one of the guys I worked with was playing a Gaelic football match. Did I tell this before on a podcast?
I think you told
He was
me.
playing a Gaelic. He was playing a Gaelic football match out near the border, like right on the border, but on the south side. And they had the whole Gaelic football is like mixed between soccer and rugby, right? Look it up. So they go out there. So they're playing like guys from South Armagh, right? Talk about an intimidating people to play sport against, right? But I mean, the field they were playing on was literally in view of the British OPs, the big permanent observation post the Brits had. So they were within a couple of miles of the border. So they're on the field, they're getting ready to go, and half the other team are missing. And like 4 or 5 guys are missing, and the referee's like, this is ridiculous. And he's about to call it. And a huge explosion goes off in the north. And they heard it, right? And then like 10 minutes later, a car screeches to a halt. The 4 guys jump out, and they're already dressed in the jerseys, like, and the shorts and thing, and they run on the field and start playing.
Jesus Christ.
And you talk about an intimidating thing, You'd be like, wow. But yeah, South Armagh, complete bandit country at one point, and very insular, very hard for British intelligence to infiltrate, which the IRA was heavily infiltrated, but not in South Armagh, I don't think. One of the commanders there, I'm not going to mention his name, but he famously said, we're going to bomb the British to the negotiating table, and then we're going to booby trap the table. Right, that was his mindset, right? So South Armagh gone, right, for the Brits. East Tyrone, very active. I remember the incidents where they were shooting at helicopters, all kinds of stuff, right? So I'm sorry, just yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Like I mean, they were sort of demonstrating very high levels of military acumen as well. Like they were using night vision, ballistic vests. They were clearly either self-taught or had gotten training elsewhere. They're very effective. And their idea was basically blowing up like barracks and everything else, making liberated zones, basically making another South Armagh. And they did a good job of it. But Seamus McIlwain in the middle of this was killed by the SES in about 3 years after the jailbreak. But this guy was, to put this in context, I don't think it's probably fair to say, but it's what the British were saying. They're saying the IRA in Belfast and Derry, they'd set off, they'd do something to be on the evening news. The guys in Tyrone and Armagh, they were out to kill you. Like these guys were really, they were there for one purpose alone. This guy would be, every day of the week, would be patrolling, carrying out surveillance, reconnaissance, and attacking.
Were they, and I might be off here, but was the East Tyrone active service unit that hit Loughall?
Exactly, and that's where Patrick McKerney had escaped from Loughall and got killed in Loughall.
Escaped from the maze.
Yeah.
And got killed in Loughall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think Loughall is another great one to talk about. Another point, like the ambush in Loughall, because it was devastating to the IRA. It was a huge win for the British government, right? And the SAS in particular. So I didn't know that. He escaped from the maze and got killed in Loughall when they were going in to kill all these cops that are in a remote police station. And the intelligence, the SAS were waiting for them. And opened fire on them and kill them all outright, right? That's an interesting one. Yeah, they were very active. Active service unit. Yeah.
And also like Kieran Fleming, another guy who escaped, died in a shootout with the SES. He actually didn't get shot. He actually drowned. He was trying to, he killed, well, people say that he was the one who did the fatal shooting, but he killed an SES Sergeant, Al Slatter. Killed him, but when he was trying to escape across the river, there was a huge swell and he got swept away and drowned. So, I mean, these guys... were like 3 to 4 years out of prison, and were having almost daily to weekly interactions with the SES and Special Reconnaissance Regiment. So, like, I mean, they kind of knew what was going to happen to them. They knew their luck was not going to last forever. Other people, again, I mean, like Jared McDonnell, we were talking about this on our last podcast about Pat McGee and the Brighton bombing. He went over and joined up with Pat McGee and started planning bombings in London. He was over there the same year he broke out. So he was operating for like 2 years within London. The lads were like Keen Fleming killed Al Slater in the SES, got swiped away by a river, died. They kind of knew like what was the outcome here, But other people joined different active service units. Like Jared McDonnell joined Pat McGee in London for the bombing campaign in 1985, and like part of their plan was to blow up the Hereford SES base, before they got rolled. Then you had other lads like Jerry Kelly and Bick McFarlane. They last until 1986, so that's 3 years as part of an active service unit attacking British targets in Germany and the Netherlands. And they were very active during the 80s. Like my dad worked as, they called it a gastarbeiter, guest worker in construction out in, when it was West Berlin. And he remembered getting like one of the German workers there, like, a member of your army has blown up a British base. And he's like, "Whoa, what are you talking about?"
Your army, your army.
Your army, yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you how many times I heard that. Oh, you were the Irish Army? That's the IRA? And I was like, no. Uniformed, not ununiformed, right?
Yeah.
It shows a level of commitment, right? You said they were given the option to disappear or stay.
Yeah.
And if that's true, right, and it's not just propaganda, then it shows a fucking high level of commitment to go back to work knowing where you're going and you're catching a bullet or you go back to the maze, right? And you ain't escaping twice.
The sad thing about it is I think a lot of those people made the decision to do active service because they thought, either way, I'm going to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life anyway.
Yeah.
Like the interesting thing about it is that all these people who who escaped, right? And then again, there was quite a considerable amount of those people who chose that life where they were like, I'm just going to be anonymous. And they waited until like the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and then they came back essentially, and
Yeah.
to live a normal life. But the person who was actually like the mastermind behind the whole breakout was a guy called Larry Marley, really intelligent fella. But he decided not to break out with the rest of them. He plotted it, he planned it, but he stayed behind. So he did his bit in prison. He allowed these guys to escape. And when he got out eventually, he got out like in 1986. He basically said, look, I'm going to stand back from the IRA. He's like, I've been 15 years either on the run or in prison. I have a wife. I have a bunch of young kids. I need to stand back from this. And of course, like everyone kind of knew at this point, this guy was the real mastermind behind this breakout. So he was public enemy number one. So it doesn't really make a difference if you say, look, lads, I'm gonna retire. The UVF killed him in 1987.
Wow.
Yeah. And like, I mean,
So I wonder, like, if he didn't go on the break because he knew he'd be paroled in a couple of years, right? He knew he'd get out, right, in a couple of years, and he didn't have, like, a lot of these guys had life sentences.
oh yeah. Seamus
didn't
McElwain was
lose,
going for a life.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could fuck all to lose if you got a life sentence without the possibility of parole, unless there's a peace treaty, right?
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. Like a segment went back to work, big segment. A segment went foreign and tried to disappear. And so that guy tried to tap out, and they got killed by Protestant paramilitaries because he had the name.
Yeah, and also, I'll be very honest, I mean, like, when someone like that, high profile like that, gets killed by the UVF, I'm pretty sure the UVF had a very helping hand.
Oh, of course, and that's not even theory. That's been proven, right?
Yeah,
very, very proven. The collusion between loyalist paramilitaries and the security forces, like it was rampant. And I remember one time when I was living in Ireland, I was in the Irish Army. I remember one time hearing on the news that the UDA, which is a paramilitary organization, had broken into a UDR regiment and stolen all the guns. They all worked there. Let's not pretend, right? I look at this like, again, we're not, supporters of the IRA. We're not. This is history, right? And I love looking at history. There was a couple other breakouts. And I was thinking of this when I hit you up. I said, "Hey, what do we talk about? I want to talk about breakouts in Ireland." So Mountjoy was one where they came in a helicopter and landed in the exercise yard and took out 3 high-ranking IRA members. That was in the south.
That was brilliant. Yeah.
And then they moved all the prisoners to Portlaoise.
Yeah.
Which was another maximum security. So when I was in the Irish Army, when I was in the infantry before I went to SOF, we patrolled the border because I was stationed on the border. So there is permanently a platoon or platoon plus of Irish Army soldiers and the guard guarding Portlaoise prison, right? Now, they're not dealing with the prisoners. They're on the cordon. They're on the rooftops. They're there to shoot down a freaking helicopter if it tries to land, right? They're the ones with the guns because the prison guards don't have guns. So that was a permanent presence with the Irish Army, and it was known to be a horrible duty position, right? And they rotated it between all their units in Ireland, but they never bothered us because we were on the border. We were already a lot of work. But one time it came up and we had to go. And I wish I'd went at the time because it would have been an experience and I'd be able to talk about it now. But I was like, I don't want to fucking do this. And it turned out that you could be exempt. And it was an IRA prison, but you could be exempt from the duty if you had a relative who was currently a prisoner. And guess who had? I had a cousin in there. And I was like, oh, I got a guy, 7 years for IRA membership, right? So I got exempt. Now, this is how to do. Dude, I remember the most random crap from decades ago, and I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I remember the kind of rhythm that went. It was a 3-month duty. You had to go there for 3 months to Portlaoise. It was in the middle of the country, right? Now, in that 3 months, you did 3 days on and 3 days off for 3 freaking months, right? And inside that 3 days on, you did 9 hours on, 9 hours off. 9 hours on, for 3 straight days. Now you think about that, right? If you go on 9 o'clock in the morning and you come out at 6, you're probably not going to be able to sleep, right, for a couple of hours, and then you might get a couple of hours sleep, and then you're back on for 9 more hours, and then it jacks your sleep up, right? And then, when you come out of there for 3 days, especially at that time, it probably took half a day to get home, right? Well, you get home for a day, and then you gotta come back, right, for 3 months. So the guys who actually had to go said it just sucked. But they were under, because of Mountjoy. Mountjoy, again, the IRA flew a helicopter and landed. They took a guy hostage, flew the helicopter, landed in the exercise yard. 3 high-ranking guys got on, they freaking took off, right? Because of that, they had machine guns on the roof of Port Lakes and probably had until the peace treaty. And they had strict orders. They fired warning shots, they had tracers, and then they opened fire if it tried to land. There was a breakout of Port Lakes 2 in 73 or 4, I think. Yeah, you familiar with that one?
Yeah. It's like 19 prisoners got out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think an Irish soldier shot one of them.
Yeah.
Shot one of the IRA guys, right, from the roof. But they put an explosive on the gate and blew it, like an improvised. You build an improvised explosive device in prison.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. Yeah.
They smuggled in gelignite as a booster, and they used ammonium nitrate fertilizer to...
How do you make Anfro in prison?
I know.
Oh my God, insane, right? But again, I got nothing else to do. This is my job 24/7 is to figure this shit out. Whereas, and the reason I talk about that rhythm of 9 on, 9 off, 9 on, 9 off, 9 on for 3 fucking days, and then do that for 3 months. How much interest do you think those guys had, really? Again, you're on the roof with a rifle, live ammunition, and you're bored to fucking tears. And you're not really committed to the operation, you want to put it that way. But again, human nature, you get bored, you get complacent, you get... But the soldiers were purely a cordon and purely an armed overwatch, and the prison guards dealt with the prisoners. I tell you, I never said never, and I'd do anything to feed my family and support my family. I'd hate to be a prison guard. I just would hate it, and it takes a certain type of person to do that.
I wouldn't do it.
It wouldn't be for me.
Nah. Though, to be honest with you, the Mountjoy escape some of it was just comical, though. I mean, like, the reason why no one thought, Jesus, a helicopter flying over the air, that's unusual, is because the Minister for Defence at the time, a guy called Paddy Donegan, he instead of being like a normal human being and driving around in a car, he felt he was so important he warranted a helicopter, so he's always going around in a helicopter.
Yeah, there was a lot of those dipshits at that time too, right? The mayor of Dublin, like, he had his own island and shit, like fucking, yeah. But I heard that before, that when the helicopter come in, they thought that's who it was. The guards.
Yeah.
And they like saluted him or something. I mean, creative, ballsy. And the guy that took hostage, the pilot, they didn't hurt him.
No.
They flew, landed, got out. Did those guys get recaptured? I can't remember.
No. So Seamus Toomey was like the chief of staff, the IRA. Like, I mean, this is like the main guy, like, Yeah. They got him out. I mean, essentially, once I think you're in prison, I think their protocol is essentially they can't really use you operationally for quite some time, like just in case you've been compromised in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. But he remained free. I mean, like the one thing that makes me kind of very typically Irish thing is that, like, there's a breakout, it's a scandal, it shows like, Jesus Christ, what were we doing with regard to security? It becomes a pop, like a top number 1 song by the Wolf Tones, Up Like a Bird. And you're like, Jesus Christ. Oh. Yeah.
I gotta put that in here. Up Like a Bird.
Up Like a Bird, yeah.
It's a very Irish thing. Like the IRA songs, and actually we talked about Loch All. There's a song about Loch All and all that, and it's a very cultural thing. Like when I was in Lebanon with the Irish Army, and guys would, you couldn't drink on the outposts, at least you weren't supposed to. You go back to the canteen where everybody congregated and everybody would have a couple of beers, and guy get up and start singing songs. Like, I've never seen that in America ever, and I never did it. But it very, very Irish thing, right? Very, very Celtic thing. But yeah, I can't imagine. I imagine after that huge breakout in the 70s in Portlaoise that security that's probably when they brought in soldiers, our soldiers, and that's probably when they took it kind of serious, right? The Yeah, and I saw a thing where in 1998 they found a tunnel in H Block.
That's
back
right.
to H Block, back to the maze. They found a tunnel that had been dug that never got used.
Yeah,
But it was supposed to be tunnel proof
yeah, and it had
with
a
sensors in the ground and all crap, right?
oh yeah, but it,
Yeah.
it had its own electricity and lighting. It was like
Yeah.
it was like you know your man El Chapo when he got away. You're like, Jesus Christ, he has his own ventilation system down here. Like he escaped in style.
Yeah. It's of all the ways to get out, tunneling, man. You got to have some discipline, and you got to have some time, to put that effort in. But crazy stuff, man. I don't know of any others. There's probably more. Smaller ones here and there. I know. Brendan Hughes, who was like a top guy in the IRA, he escaped from Longcash. He wrapped himself up in this mattress that was nasty. The book Say Nothing has a good account of that, kind of in his own words on how he got out. Again, complacency, a little bit on the guards, but human nature is human nature, and we all get complacent at times. But it's a pretty fascinating subject. And I mean, some of the supermax prisons in America are, they rely on technology a lot, right? Because humans make mistakes with cameras and sensors and early warning. People still get out. People still escape, which is insane. Now, a lot of times they have help from guards, but yeah, when you've nothing to do but sit back and watch human nature. And a paramilitary organization does that anyway, right? They sit back and like the IRA have put IEDs out knowing they'd be found purely to watch the response to the British, right? So they know the reaction time, what they do, how they put the cordon in. So now next time we know how to fight against that, right? So they were already good at that when they went in and seriously committed to getting their life back, life sentence.
Yeah, and even as technology develops, I mean, like people don't seem to realize this, but in the North at the time, they had what would be, I suppose, a prototype of AI with the Vengeance program, which was basically it would auto-identify car numbers, all the rest that would be stolen, and they'd be marking them as IRA scout cars essentially. So that was all around the maze. I'm a strong believer. If there's a will, there's a way. And technology, I mean, it's very funny. I was having a conversation with someone there about the mass surveillance that they have out in the world at the moment, and they said, well, everyone's
especially in England.
Yeah,
especially
exactly.
in England.
Oh yeah,
like there's cameras everywhere in England. Yeah,
exactly. But even with phone calls, they listen to everything you say. I said, well, in Ireland, up until like the late 1960s, early 70s. If you called Ireland from abroad, you'd have an operator that would have to plug you in, and they could listen in at any point themselves.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
just look. Humans are very adaptable creatures, and if there's a security apparatus that's against them or an intelligence apparatus against them, they'll either have a way of infiltrating it or circumventing it. It's just human nature.
Yeah. It is. I remember when growing up as a kid, the payphones. And the receiver hung up on the thing, right? You could actually tap the number you wanted to call out on it, and as long as there was no zero in the number, because you can't tap zero, right? But if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I wanted to call somebody, right? I'd have to put money in, but I don't have any money. I can go 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and I would get through for free. Hey, improvise and adapt, and get your phone call for free.
Yeah.
I don't know how the hell we figured that out. I remember God, I did so much shit. We were we had no money. And you go into the video games and you put in 50 pence, right? Like 50 cents, right? And you get so many, or you can put in 10 cents. And if you put in 50 cents, it would give you 5 10 cents pieces as change so you could play the game. One of the guys I hung out with figured out if you took the 50 cents and you took 10 cents and you put a rubber band around it and you dropped it in and then you took like a lollipop stick and flicked it into the 50 cents, it would give you 5 tens. You know what I mean? And you could just do it over and over and over again. Yeah, you can adapt and you can figure some shit out, especially when you got time and you're in prison. That was awesome, Oshin. Great. There is a lot of stuff now. A lot of stuff coming up about the IRA on YouTube, and because a lot of information is being released that wasn't, because of the peace treaty. A lot of guys are getting up and talking. There is some interviews on YouTube with guys who are actually there, who broke out of maze and stuff like that. Very interesting to look at them now. The guy Jerry Kelly that became a member of Parliament. Very very intelligent guy, like very very articulate, well spoken. But it's funny that he's the guy who shot the guy, and now he's a member of Parliament, right? And he's in charge of security, right? I tell you, life is weirder than fiction sometimes. But the next time I really want to look at Loch All.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember it happening, and the things that led up to it. Of course, Steak Knife, I think, was probably part of that. I don't know that for a fact, but the British intelligence obviously had a lot of people in place, and that got compromised, and it was devastating to the IRA. I don't always want to focus on IRA success.
Yeah.
Let's look at the other side, because it
goes both ways.
Ebbed and flowed. And, credit where credit's due. The British government, the British military, MI5, MI6, they infiltrated the IRA at the highest level. With double agents and informants, and they really did.
Yeah.
It took decades.
Yeah.
But they really did pull it apart in the end. And it's I'm working Robin Sage now, which is the culminating exercise for special forces, and it's an unconventional war. It's guerrilla war. An ODA goes in, trains a guerrilla force. I'm the guerrilla chief, right, in charge. But I keep looking back to my own experiences, as we all do. But you look at that build-up, you look at intelligence. Intelligence rules the battlefield, man, especially in that type of war. And, I'm going to do this, and they're going to do this, and I'm going to flex this way and flex this way. And I heard a great quote one time, and it said, I think Kissinger said it. He said, the conventional army loses if it doesn't win, but the guerrilla army wins if it doesn't lose.
Yeah.
Right, which is very true. If a conventional army goes in, Americans in Afghanistan, Iraq, if you don't win fairly quickly, then you get dragged into protracted war, and it just drains your resources, and you can't stay there forever. Whereas if a guerrilla force just doesn't get torn apart, which some have, if they manage to hang on year after year after year after, eventually they're going to win, right? And that is very, very true.
I think it's interesting. I always look at, I suppose, a bit of a controversial take on it, but I always look at the Loch All ambush in the same light I look at the Mull of Kintyre crash. Some people would say...
What was the Mull of Kintyre crash?
So you're winding up the Troubles, essentially. Both sides have been talking for the last, I'd say, about 5 years. And they're like, we need to come to some solution here, because we don't want to be stuck here forever in a protracted war. And so basically all the hawks, like the special operations hawks, intelligence guys, MI6, MI5, their version of the NSA, GCHQ, are all in a helicopter together to fly off this meeting, and it blows up in the middle of the Atlantic. And everyone's like, well, who the hell did that? Or was it an accident?
Yeah.
So, and like with Loch All as well, you're looking at these guys who, again, this is totally speculation. There's, and some of these people are still living, so obviously I don't want to be saying stuff, but you got all these guys who are very much the total war kind of policy guys in the IRA, getting wiped out on clearly an operation that was compromised from the get-go. Like a lot of intelligence to get people in place there. So you'd wonder if
you do, and when you think you know, you don't. Another thing where I see where you're going was the snipers in South Armagh. A lot of talk that they were sacrificed for the peace treaty.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that.
They weren't killed, they were rolled up, peace treaty went in, they all got out later on, but there was a lot of talk that peace treaty wasn't going to move forward until these guys got captured by the SAS, right? So a lot of whatever happens that there's a whole lot of stuff going on under the surface that you don't know. Funny. Yep. All right, let's do Loch All next time.
Deadly.
And I think it'll be a great conversation because, and again, the whole thing was, oh my God, shoot to kill policy. That the Republican movement tried to spin it that it was just murder, but these boys weren't there to collect the rent. They were heavily armed.
Oh yeah.
They were going in to kill everybody. But it's a fascinating operation. And I'll do a little research because I want to see where the intel came from. If that's out, it's probably not. It's probably classified. But yeah, I think that's cool. When you come back to America?
Probably in January or February.
Okay, we need to go shoot some long gun, man.
Deadly.
You need to go crank some rounds off out there at Comets Creek. Cool, man. That was great. That was a good conversation. I like the topic. I find it fascinating. And yep, till next time. Thanks, Oshin. Appreciate it.
Easy.